I started dog sitting when I was 13 to make some extra money. Now at 19, I have an established process where people can contact me through social media to arrange dog sitting services. One day I got a message on Instagram from a man, let's call him Mr. Brown, asking if I could watch his 2 dogs for a week while he and his wife went on vacation to Florida. The dates were the 4th through the 11th, and he offered to pay me $300. I agreed to stay at their house for the week to care for the dogs, Mina the Yorkie and Letty the Greyhound. The Browns' house was surrounded by 76 acres of land, so I was used to the rural setting coming from a farm town myself. They mentioned their nearest neighbor was an older woman, Miss Rose, who was nice but confused due to drug use. Sometimes Miss Rose would accidentally pull into their driveway thinking it was hers and mistake Mrs. Brown for her deceased daughter. This made me feel sympathy for her. The first 2 days went smoothly. On the 3rd day, Miss Rose pulled into the driveway as I was outside. When she saw me, she quickly drove off, likely realizing she had the wrong house. That night, Mrs. Brown called saying Miss Rose had called her about a robber being in their home. I explained what happened and we laughed it off as confusion on Miss Rose's part. In the middle of the night, I awoke to a scratching noise outside the window. I opened the blinds to find Miss Rose trying to pry the window open with pliers. She started banging on the window, so I grabbed the dogs, locked us in the bathroom, and called 911. I could hear Miss Rose shatter the window as I whispered the play-by-play to the operator while hiding in the tub. When Miss Rose got inside, I saw her feet under the door. She looked through the crack, and I gasped, prompting her to start pounding on the door with the pliers. The operator said police were 3 minutes away, but it felt like forever with Miss Rose screaming at me. Finally, I heard sirens, and the police kicked down the front door and apprehended Miss Rose. After giving my statement, I went to stay with my parents, too rattled to be alone. I still got fully paid by the Browns, but never dog sat again after that traumatic ordeal. Miss Rose was charged with breaking and entering, though she claimed she was stopping a robber. The whole experience left me much more cautious and paranoid. I live in a major city and moved here during the pandemic. With not much going on, I got into the habit of having some beers and food at the local lakeside park. You see all sorts of people there. Earlier this year, on a day that wasn't too wet or cold, I went to the park with a sandwich, some beers, and my true crime podcast. I found a little group of trees, pretty dry and hidden, and sat down. As I was listening to my podcast, I noticed a man walking towards me. Even from a distance, he seemed odd, so I figured he'd ask for a cigarette. I decided to give him one to avoid any aggression. Sure enough, this weirdo offered me some Doritos from a bag open sideways in exchange for a cigarette. I declined the chips but gave him a cigarette to get him to leave. He introduced himself and we started an odd, meandering conversation. He was clearly off, but we talked about normal things. After chatting for almost 2 hours, I finally made an excuse to leave. Less than a week later, I was having an after-work beer at a bar since it was too wet for the park. I heard a familiar voice and looked up. It was him. I hoped he wouldn't corner me again. Before he noticed me, he complained loudly about the TV, music, prices, until the bartender kicked him out for being aggressive. A few weeks later, the bartender told me a story. He had run into an old regular who seemed upset. The regular explained that while walking in the park, some guy had recognized him from the bar years ago. The regular denied knowing him because 30 years prior, this man had kidnapped and murdered a woman after forcing her to withdraw money from her bank account daily. He was caught still driving her bloody car and using her ATM card. The body was never found. The bartender and I researched it and found old articles and a mugshot. It was the same weird man from the park, 30 years younger. I'm glad I trusted my instinct that he seemed off and got away from him as quickly as I could. About 3 years ago, when I was 38 weeks pregnant, My husband and I lived in a small community we called the village. It consisted of 2 dead-end streets off a highway with forests beyond the ends of the roads. In one trailer park lived my aunt, uncle, and cousins. In another trailer nearby lived my husband's brother and nieces. My grandma's house was on the next street over. One day my best friend Rai was visiting from college. She had spent the night with me. The next day we decided to walk up my street, down the highway, past the local store, then down my grandma's street, and back through the woods to my house. We did this to try to get my labor started, as my pregnant belly was huge and my back often hurt. As we walked and talked down the highway, a white truck drove by very slowly. I knew the speed limit was 55 mph, yet this truck was going about 30 mph. Through the driver's window, I saw a bald white man who looked to be in his 50s, rubbernecking at us. It looked like there might have been someone else in the passenger seat. The truck was old, but I didn't notice the make, model, or license plate. Rai was talking and didn't seem to notice until I said, "Hey, that guy just drove by really slowly. I don't think that's anyone I know." She replied she hadn't noticed it. Less than 2 minutes later, we saw him coming back from the other direction. I said, "That's him again. Get in the grass." Since we were on the right side of the road, we went down the grassy slope off the road, but were still in front of people's houses. He passed us slowly again. When I turned around, he was slowing down even more and pulled over. It looked like he was turning the truck around. I told Rai to run, so we took off as fast as I could, being very pregnant. We thought about going to the store, but decided to head for my grandma's house instead. We ran up the hill, and I looked back to see the truck pulling into the store parking lot. We kept running and got to my grandma's, where I told her and my aunt what happened. My aunt filed a police report, though I was reluctant to at first, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. It turned out there were other reports of a man creeping around the neighborhood trying to lure kids. In another trailer park, a mom came out and threatened a man trying to lure her child from the woods. Over the next weeks, we thought we saw his truck but weren't sure. One day when I wasn't home, the man drove past my young cousins while they were playing outside. He turned around and stopped next to them, trying to get my 11-year-old cousin into his truck, but my cousin refused, and they all ran home. A week after I had my baby, the man was seen again. My 2 teen girl cousins were in their room when one opened the blinds and saw him squatting on the AC unit, staring at them. He jumped down and ran off when they screamed. My aunt called the police, but my husband and his friend couldn't find him in the woods. It seemed this man had no preference for age or gender. He was looking for anyone he could lure, for whatever sick reason. For weeks, the police patrolled the highway looking for him but never caught him. To this day, I wonder if he was from out of town and hope he gets caught before doing something truly terrible. A few weeks ago, I saw a news report about a teacher from a prominent private school who had just been convicted of child abuse. The victims included his own children as well as students. The allegations had been suppressed until after the trial, but were now being made public. When they showed his name and photo, I was shocked to recognize my childhood friend, Cameron. Cameron and I were best friends in primary school, along with another boy named Wilson. We finished school together in 1995, after which we lost touch when we went to different high schools. We used to have sleepovers together, either the 3 of us or just 2 of us, often at Cameron's house. Seeing the news report jogged some disturbing memories from those sleepovers that I had forgotten until now. I recalled Cameron's father coming into the room while we were changing into pajamas and talking to us like we were grown-ups. He would also come into the bathroom while we were showering to chat. I even remember once seeing him nude as he entered the shower when I was leaving. At the time, with my childlike innocence, none of this registered as inappropriate. The news said Cameron's lawyers argued he had been abused himself by his father. Thinking back now as an adult, I feel anxious and sick, wondering if there is a connection and if more happened that I've suppressed. I reached out to Wilson on Facebook after 25 years to discuss this. He confirmed he too had disturbing memories of being abused by Cameron's father during those sleepovers. Wilson was relieved I contacted him, as he had carried this alone for years, never reporting it or telling anyone aside from some therapy as an adult. While my own memories are hazy, I'm shaken realizing how close I likely came to being victimized. As a naive child, I had no awareness anything was wrong, which could have easily been exploited. I plan to seek counseling to process this and aim for greater healing. I've changed names to protect privacy, but this experience highlights the need to educate and protect kids. Children's innocence makes them vulnerable to predators. I'm thankful for growing awareness, but we must remain vigilant. Late one Friday night, my boyfriend and I were watching TV after smoking some weed. Around midnight, there was a knock at our apartment door. We looked at each other, confused. A second round of knocking started, and my boyfriend got up to check the peephole. He saw it was an annoying older woman in her 50s who lives in the apartment building. She always talks his ear off and waits for him to leave before driving away each morning. Reluctantly, he opened the door as I hid the paraphernalia. I could hear her speaking incoherently until he figured out she was saying her heat wasn't working. He offered to look at it, and she said yes. As he went to follow her, our cat ran out the door, so he had to quickly close it to get the cat. When he got upstairs, the woman was standing in her dark doorway. Before he could say anything, she said, "Never mind, it's working now." My boyfriend noticed all the lights were off in her apartment. She then creepily said he could still come in and take a look if he wanted. He declined and hurried back downstairs, feeling unsettled by the encounter. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps and faint knocking at our neighbor's door, with the woman yelling strange things again. This went on for 5 minutes before she left, not going back upstairs. The next morning, my boyfriend discovered a nail stabbed into his tire. We figured the woman likely did it, angry over the unanswered late-night knocks. We called the apartment complex to complain about her harassment. Now, almost a week later, my boyfriend hasn't seen the woman or her car all week. Her apartment remains completely dark day and night. I'm concerned for her well-being and plan to request a wellness check tomorrow. I'll continue to provide updates if I learn anything more about this increasingly bizarre situation with our odd neighbor.